Hi, welcome to Perp Miniatures. I'm going to be kitbashing a Goliath Stimmer. The body of this model is built using an Age of Sigmar Khorne Exalted Deathbringer. I started by assembling the majority of the body per the instructions. Before gluing the legs on, I scraped away at the more Khorne looking armor since it had a distinctly chaos feel to it. For his right arm, I cut a chain cleaver from the World Eater Jackals kit. My plan was to equip this model with paired pulverizers, which are serrated axes, but I wanted to make them look more like chain weapons. To beef up this weapon, I took some saw blades from the Ambot kit. I glued the two saw blades together, and then made some adjustments to the chain cleaver so the saw blades slotted over the top of the cleaver. Once they fit right, I glued the saw blades on with some sprue goo. To add some more flair to the weapon, I took a renderizer axe from the Goliath gang kit and cut the skull part from the axe. After making some cuts to the axe, I glued it to the back of the chain cleaver to make it look like some sort of saw guard for the top. I was happy with how the weapon was looking, so I checked how the arm would fit onto the body. The base model had a portion of his right arm already, so I found a good spot where both arm parts overlapped. I cut the chain cleaver arm's shoulder muscle from the arm, trying to leave as much of the bicep and tricep as possible. After checking the arms against each other again, I made some small adjustments to the chain cleaver arm so the muscles of both arms seemed close to matching up. Then I drilled holes for pinning and glued the arm on with some sprue goo so I could meld the muscle joint even more. I also cut the big spike on the body's shoulder pad off at this point since it was more chaosy looking than I thought would fit the model. I cut a head from the Goliath gang kit and glued it together with the neck and mohawk part. Then I checked how it would fit with the body of the model and made some adjustments to the head by cutting with my clippers, continuing to check the fit and making small cuts with my X-Acto blade until it sat right. Once I was happy with the fit, I drilled holes for pinning and glued the head on. For the left arm of the model, I cut an empty arm from the Goliath gang kit. For this arm's weapon, I cut two chain swords from the World Eater Jackals kit. I wanted the chain swords to sit side by side, so I made some cuts to the parts that stuck out from one side of each of the swords. Because the bottom of the chain sword stuck out a lot more than the tops, there was a gap between them at the top. So to fill that in, I cut another saw blade from the Ambot kit. One side of the saw blades had parts that stuck out, so I cut those down with my X-Acto blade until the saw blades sat between the chain swords. Once the saw blade sat well, I glued it in with some sprue goo. Since the Goliath arm didn't have a hand, I had to get one from another kit, so I took one from a corpse grinder called chain cleaver arm. I cut the chain cleaver from the hand, leaving some of the bottom portion of the handle. I checked how the chain swords would fit against the hand and made some small adjustments. Then I drilled holes for pinning and glued the two parts together. Once that was glued on, I cut the hand from the corpse grinder arm and glued it to the Goliath arm. I checked the fit of the arm to the body and made some adjustments by clipping away at the body so the arm sat better under the shoulder pad. Then I glued the arm in with some sprue goo so it would fill in some of the gap left by the arm. I also forgot to glue in a bit for the head, so I did that at this point, cutting the cigar from the sprue and gluing it to the face very carefully. Next, I started adding bits to the back of the model. I started with a bit from an Orc Deathkilla war trike, cutting just the box part from the rest of the bit. I checked the fit against the body and made some cuts with my X-Acto blade so it would sit around the muscles of the model's back. Then I cut a piece of the armor from an Admech Tech Priest Manipulus and glued it to the top of the box bit. The plan was to make this back piece look like an engine that the Stimmer carries on his back to pump stims into himself, so I wanted the Admech bits to give that chemical feel to it. After that, I took a jerry can I had in my bits box from some old scale model and glued it to the side of the engine. I then took the other piece off the top of the Tech Priest Manipulus armor and checked how that would fit on the engine, thinking it looked like some sort of air intake. Then I glued it onto the engine. This ended up being really fragile and kept falling off during the build, so if I were to do this again, I would wait to glue it on and I would also pin it. Before adding more to the engine, I glued it onto the model's back, using a good amount of sprue goo to cover any gaps. I moved away from the backpack for a bit to attach a belt. To give this model a piece that would tie him to the rest of the gang, I took a piece from the stone face basing kit made by Bad Squiddo Games. I thought this one would work well as a belt, and kind of looked like a wrestling champion belt, which fit with the model being a stimmer. To make the belt fit, I checked how it would sit on the model and did a lot of scraping with my X-Acto blade. After it looked like it sat well on the model, I glued it into place with some super glue. Going back to the backpack, I wanted the engine to have some big exhaust pipes coming out of it, so I clipped some pipes from the Lord Discordant on Hellstalker kit. Before doing anything with them, I scraped off the demonic faces on some of the pipes, since that really didn't fit the feel I was going for. To find the best place to attach the pipes, I looked at the silhouette of the model. If the pipes were too straight on the back, they disappeared from the front view, and if they sat completely to the side of the engine, it got muddled with the weapon in his left hand. So I found a spot at about a 45-degree angle from the engine that gave the chainsword some room and was also visible from the front. I made some cuts to the pipes so they all sat close to the engine and glued them into place with some sprue goo to fill in the gaps where they didn't sit right up against the engine. Next, I started adding some more pipes and tubes to the engine. The first of which, I added a pipe from the gas tank to the engine itself. I drilled a hole in the gas tank and one towards the top of the engine. Then I took a paper clip and bent it around the air intake bit from earlier using a pair of needle nose pliers to get a tight bend. This is the step that I would have left the air intake off until after I completed, since I'll knock that bit off a few times trying to get the paper clip bent and glued in. After checking the paper clip a lot and making small bends and adjustments to make it fit, I glued it into place with some super glue. Next, I changed to a smaller drill bit and made several holes in some of the muscles of the body. I wanted the model to look like whatever chems are coming from the engine are being pumped directly into those muscles to bulk them up during battle. Then I drilled a larger hole in the top of the engine where all the tubes would connect to. I cut several lengths of florist wire, giving myself extra to trim later, and put a small dot of super glue over the holes I drilled in the muscles. Then I put one end of the florist wire into each of these, and left them to dry without connecting the other side just yet. I wanted to let these dry, so later when I bend the wire into the engine, it doesn't keep slipping out of the other side. Once that had time to dry, I came back and put a dot of super glue on top of the engine where I drilled a hole earlier. One by one, I bent the wire so it held in the engine, and it looked like it would have enough slack so the tube wouldn't get caught on something if the stimmer were swinging his arms around in battle. The initial hole in the engine wasn't large enough to fit all of the wires into it, so I had to drill a second hole off to one side and slot the other wires into there. The majority of the model was built now, so I moved to the base. I wanted the stimmer to be on some industrial equipment like the Forge Tyrant from my previous video. To start, I took part of an orc gun wagon tread and cut it in half with my clippers. I wanted it to sit at an angle, as if it were partially sunk into the dirt, so I trimmed the backside with my X-Acto blade. Then I glued it into place with some sprue goo. The stimmer's model originally was standing on a small tactical rock, so I trimmed that off and checked that he now rested his foot on the tread from the base. After that, I cut a piece of thin plasticard to run alongside the tread, as if one side of the base were a junk pile and the plasticard denoted a walkway or something similar. Next to that plasticard piece, I cut a rectangle of plasticard sheet that had a metal siding texture and glued that onto the base. I wanted to add some more debris to the junk side of the base, so I took another strip of plasticard and cut small pieces from it. Then I put down a good amount of plastic glue on the base and stuck the plasticard down, adding in a few pieces of sprue to the pile as well. Once everything dried, I went through and cut the excess plasticard off with my clippers. I checked how the model would stand on the base and then drilled holes for pinning. Then I glued the model to the base with some plastic glue. For part of this model's backstory, I wanted to add metal plates attached to his skin, so I mixed up some green stuff and milliput in equal parts. To make the metal plates, I took a very small piece of this green stuff mixture and flattened it out a bit. Then I stuck it onto the model over some of the skin sections, and did my best to meld the green stuff to the plastic without deforming the plate shape too much. Lastly, this stimmer needed a mohawk fit for someone of his stature. so I took a sprue from an Age of Sigmar Fireslayer's Volkite Berserker's kit and cut a mohawk out. The mohawk had some dragon iconography, which was too ornate for this model, so I cut that off with my clippers, leaving just the hair of the mohawk. I cleaned up the cut I just made by scraping with the side of my X-Acto blade. Then I trimmed the saw blade pieces of the model's current mohawk off, so the new hair mohawk would sit flat against it, and also cleaned that cut up with my X-Acto blade. I checked the fit of the mohawk on the model, and then glued it into place with some sprue glue to fill in some of the smaller gaps that would be left, and made sure the mohawk sat in line with the head. With that, the model is done. While I paint the model, I'll be reading out his backstory. The story of Goro Iron Flesh. Growing up in Helmar's graveyard is no small task. Goro quickly learned only to trust his own work crew after an incident with a gangly Orlock, an ornery Ripperjack, and a shovel left him nearly lobotomized. While recovering from that wound, Goro had the bright idea to bolt a piece of metal to his skull over the wound to make himself more resilient. This turned out to be a good move when in the next week he got into a bar fight and another patron pulled a stub gun on Goro and shot him. The bullet glanced off this metal plate and left Goro with only a severe headache afterwards. Since then, Goro has made a habit of bolting metal plates over wounds he receives in an effort to protect himself. As he got into more and more fights alongside his gang, he grew stronger and stronger. When he looked at his gang around him though, he was still not the biggest. That title belonged to his gang's leader, Kurgak Anvilface, the biggest Goliath in the whole of Helmar's graveyard. Goro respected his gang leader a lot. He always fought in the fray alongside his forge brethren, and had taken more than a few good beatings, but not more than the beatings he gave out himself. But still, Goro wanted to be bigger and tougher than Anvilface, so he turned to chems, regularly spending whatever creds were left after a night out at the drinking holes on any chems he could find. Soon enough, he grew even bigger and even more crazed as he started wading into battle with just his pulverizers. This came to the notice of Kurgak Anvilface, who took Goro under his wing and taught him much, like how to forge stronger metals, how to plan a raid, and most importantly, how to scull a cup of wild snake the fastest. While this worked for Goro for a while, he soon grew frustrated as Anvilface repeatedly drew away from some fights over territory, saying they were not good fights, that the Goliath would surely lose them. But Goro didn't think so. He just needed more chems, to be even stronger. Secretly, Goro had one of the mechanics for the gang rig him up a chem delivery system to wear on his back, so Goro could get pumped up in the midst of battle. He then snuck out with some of his closest forge brothers and sisters to strike out at those that were taking their territory. He was successful in his goal, but took heavy losses to his ragtag band. When he returned, Kurgak Anvilface was furious with him. The two argued back and forth until Goro had decided that was enough and challenged Anvilface to a fight, then and there for control of the gang. Anvilface agreed, and the two raged towards each other. The fight that ensued did not take long, as the Goliaths battered each other. Goro came out of the scrap within an inch of his life, while Anvilface lay dead in the ashy ground. Goro went to recover from his many wounds, having earned several new iron plates to adorn his skin. Soon, Goro Iron Flesh was making a name for himself amongst Helmar's graveyard at the head of his gang, making good trade and bashing those that tried to mess with him. Many cycles later, Goro heard rumors of a big Goliath named Hullbreach Starborn that was gaining territory nearby. He had to leave some bruised faces behind when some of his own Goliath whispered that this Hullbreach was even bigger than Goro Iron Flesh. But even those rumors couldn't stand, so Goro led a party to go find this Hullbreach and take him down a peg. Soon enough, Goro's gang found the stronghold of Hullbreach, a new wreck in the waste of Helmar's graveyard. Goro led the assault, going quick and fast straight into the heart of the stronghold, breaking through barriers, dodging gunfire as the alarms were raised. He made it into the depths of this wreck when he saw his target. Goro had to swallow his pride for a moment, as before him, the biggest Goliath he had ever seen stepped into the chamber, donned in some sort of techie armored suit with a massive stone face attached to the front. Before Hullbreach could get a bolter shot off at him though, Goro called out through the din of battle.
"I challenge you. Fight me like a true Goliath."
Hullbreach dropped his bolter and called to his gang to cease their fire. Goro did the same as the two mighty Goliaths squared up at each other. Then, in an instant, Hullbreach raced towards Goro with incredible speed. The two swung their weapons back and forth, giving each other a few good scratches as a lucky hit was earned. Goro's onslaught was immense and left Hullbreach retreating slowly backwards. He couldn't find an opening. One of Hullbreach's crews, some misshapen figure, yelled something about it being morning, but Goro couldn't understand why that would be important. Hullbreach, however, seemed to nod to the hunchbacked Goliath and pressed on even harder than before. Goro could see the other Goliath was getting tired and kicked his own chems into overdrive, feeling the pump in his muscles. As this happened, Hullbreach bolted away from the fight. How weak. Goro chased after the coward. He was running straight towards the exit of the wreck, probably out to some vehicle to run away like some sort of tricksy Delac. So Goro chased him, feeling as the plate metal of the ship became covered in ash swept in from the outside. As he neared the entrance, he lost Hullbreach in the bright sunlight streaming in towards him. He was getting away. Goro had to go faster, so again, he pushed the chems into his system and rushed madly after the retreating Goliath. Just as he exited the ship, he came into the full sunlight of the wastes and was left squinting. In this haze, he felt a massive strike against his back. The coward had hidden from him using the sunlight and snuck up behind him. The next thing Goro knew, he was on the ground and Hullbreach stood above him, chain axe whirring just above Goro's chest. As Hullbreach raised the axe to take a final swing, they both heard a yell, that misshapen Goliath again, who came hobbling over and whispered something to Hullbreach. The bigger Goliath looked back at Goro and turned his chain axe off. Reaching out a hand to Goro, he said,
"You fight well. Join us. A Goliath like you should not be wasted watering the ash with your blood."
Goro was amazed by this. This Goliath was big, and smart as well. Thinking it over for a moment, Goro decided that being alive meant he could fight more. And for the first time in a long time, he knew he was not the biggest Goliath around. He would follow this Hullbreach Starborn, at least until he could become bigger and stronger, and maybe even smarter than his new leader. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed your time here, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.